It's November 2025 and I've made it to what was the capital of the Gauls during the time of the Romans, not including that one small village of indomitable Gauls that held out. Lyon owes its existence and importance to its location at the confluence of the Rhône and Saône rivers, the latter cutting through the rock to create the two hills today, the Fourvière and Croix, that have stood guard over the river's meeting point, the Presqu'île, today home to much of the modern city centre. The Gallic Lugdun was Latinised by the Romans into Lugdunum, and since the 13th century that name has metamorphosed into the modern Lyon. There is uncertainty about where the name Lug comes from. It could be the Celtic god of order and law, Lug, but it could have evolved from Lugon, meaning crow, the bird being the messenger of Lug. But the word can also mean light. The Don comes from Donos, meaning fortress or hill, likely to designate the hill of Fourvière, on which the ancient city was founded. So Lyon is Hill of God Lug, Hill of the Crows, or Shining Hill. Traces of human habitation in the area around the rivers date back to the Stone Age, and its position would have put it on the trade routes from the Mediterranean to northern Europe. By the Iron Age, an emporium existed which traded with Vienne, capital of the powerful Allobroge Celtic tribe. There is little evidence for settlement in the area, but the remains of animal bones and pottery suggest that the area around the Fourvière hill may have been a site of feasting and celebration prior to the arrival of the Romans. It was the Romans who saw the true potential of the location, with two easily defendable hills overlooking the rivers, and by 43 BC the city was founded and quickly grew in size, becoming the capital of the Roman province of Gallia Lugdunensis. The colony of Lugdunum became a great city because of its location at a strategic point on the road network, which would turn out to be particularly useful in the campaigns of Augustus in 20 BC to conquer Germania. The city became the operations centre for the northern territories and consequently became the location where local nobles met, cementing the city's political position. For 300 years after its founding, it was the most important city in northwestern Europe, and the city even supplied the empire with two emperors. Claudius, whose reign from January 41 to October 54 brought a period of relative calm between the cruel, extravagant and erratic reign of Caligula and the fiddling whilst Rome burnt reign of his successor Nero. The second emperor the city produced was Caracalla, who reigned from January 198 to April 217 and is perhaps best known for the Baths of Caracalla, the second largest bathing complex in the history of Rome that were built during his reign and are still a popular tourist attraction in the Italian capital. With a network of aqueducts being completed between 20 and 10 BC, the city was able to expand rapidly, and attention could be turned for construction of a large number of monuments and civic buildings, the most obvious being the first theatre to be built in Gaul. Construction started on the site around 15 BC with a theatre with a 90-metre diameter built next to the hill with 4,500 seats. Under Emperor Hadrian at the beginning of the 2nd century, the theatre was expanded, taking its final diameter to 108 metres and increasing the seating capacity to around 10,000. As with so many other structures around the former empire, the theatre was abandoned as the empire collapsed, at which point the area became a very useful quarry for local construction, leading to a significant damage to the site. Many of the bridges over the rivers, along with the Saint-Jean Cathedral, are built from stone that originally made up the theatre. During the Middle Ages, the site became buried by scree from the hill overlooking the site, and it fell into oblivion, its position and slope making it ideal for becoming vineyards or for terraced crops. In 1886, Professor Lafont purchased a property on Rue Kléberg, and the following year, intrigued by the curved shape of his garden, did some digging and uncovered the tops of 3 curved walls, intersected by other radiating walls supporting the remains of vaults. The original thought was that this might be the remains of the city's Roman amphitheatre, but measurements showed the shape of the remains to be semicircular and more in keeping with a large theatre. Only limited work took place on the site at the time, as all of the land was in private ownership of various different owners, so it wasn't until 1930s that work on systematic excavation of the site got underway. Starting in April 1933, works to unearth the site begun, primarily as a project of the City Council to provide work for 27 unemployed men. Excavation works continued throughout the period of the Second World War, and from 1941 onwards, masons followed on behind the excavation team, carrying out work to consolidate and, where possible, restore the remains, not just of the ancient theatre, but also the neighbouring Ogin, which had also by now been discovered. The whole process was completed by 1946, at which point the building was reopened to the public as a theatre. Over 2,000 years after its initial construction, the ancient theatre of Fourvière is still in use as a cultural venue, including playing host to the annual Nuit de Fourvière festival, which showcases theatre, circus, music, dance and film, although today the capacity of the theatre is much closer to that of the first version, with space for up to 4,400 spectators. The Odeon, which was originally built at the very end of the 1st century or beginning of the 2nd, around the same time as the main theatre was being expanded, was designed as a more intimate venue for music and at its peak could accommodate up to 3,000 spectators. The restored Odeon seats between 900 and 1,200, depending on its configuration. Other excavation works through the 1950s and 60s uncovered more Roman remains of the upper part of the site, including cisterns and parts of the basilica. Today, the whole site is open to the public free of charge to look around, offering an insight into the importance of the city during the Roman time. A short distance away and located in the grounds of a small housing complex are further remains of the Roman past of the city, with parts of the major bath complex having been discovered. After chance discoveries, including 2 underground vaulted rooms, archaeological excavations were carried out at a site on the Rue des Phares between 1974 and 1980, unearthing the complex that covered about 1 hectare, including a set of baths dating to the 1st century and abandoned by the beginning of the 3rd century. The baths are based over terraces due to the slope of the hill. Due to other buildings in the vicinity, including a school, it hasn't been possible to excavate more of the site, but the small fragment, so close to the theatre, adds the importance of the Fourvière Hill during antiquity. But it's not just the Fourvière Hill that houses part of the Roman past of the city, as at the foot of the Croix Hill sits the Amphithéâtre of the Three Gaules, referring to the 3 Gaulish regions of the Roman Empire, of which Lyon was the most important and powerful city. The amphitheatre was part of the federal sanctuary of the 3 Gauls, dedicated to the cult of Rome and Augustus. Stones found on the site would indicate that the amphitheatre was constructed or completed in the year 19. Whilst only a part of the amphitheatre have been uncovered today, with much of the site lost to ground clearances and erosion over the centuries, it would have had dimensions for put it on a par with the arenas in Nîmes and Arles for floor space. But likely, when it was built, it would only have had 4 levels of seating, making it smaller. Expansion works carried out sometime later added another 2 galleries, bringing it up to the same size as those other arenas, with the capacity of around 20,000. At the time, it would have been capable of seating the entire population of Lugdunum and the surrounding area. In the summer of 177 AD, a large number of Christians were martyred in Lyon, and the executions of at least 6 for 47 were carried out in the arena. Serious excavations of the site only took place from 1956 onwards, and today the small remains, supporting walls covering half the area of the amphitheatre, are visible from the Jardin de Plan. The full history of the most important city in northwestern Europe is detailed in the Lugdunum Museum. Over the centuries, as archaeological remains have been discovered across the city, they were slowly brought together in collections, with the former abbey of the Ladies of Saint-Pierre being transformed into a museum by decree in 1802. Most of the artefacts that have been discovered during the excavations of the theatres were stored near the site, initially in the former convent of the Notre-Dame de la Compassion, and then in the Magnéval house on the Rue Kléberg, both buildings belonging to the city. These storage facilities soon became known as the Antiquarium, in reference to the antiquarium created in Rome by the popes for their sculpture collections. There had been plans to replace the convent building with an archaeological centre, but these had been abandoned by 1944. A room in the Magnéval house was fitted out in the early 1950s to act as a museum and was opened to the public in 1954. The space for display and interpretation of artefacts was disproportionately small compared to the importance of the collection and the nearby remains, so the decision was taken in 1967 to replace the antiquarium with a much larger purpose-built museum on the same site, so that it was right next to the ruins. This required the demolition of existing buildings, which took place in 1969. Construction on the museum began in 1971 and was opened for public in 1975. The museum is built into the hillside and is made up of one continuous shallow ramp that snakes its way down through the hillside from the street level at the top to the stage floor of the theatre at the bottom. Along the way, a couple of large portal windows offer views out over the theatre and Odeon. Unlike many other cities that were either abandoned or significantly reduced following the collapse of Rome, Lyon survived as an important centre, initially with a number of important monastic communities establishing themselves in the city between the 4th and 6th centuries. In 1078, Pope Gregory VII conferred the title of Primate of the Gauls on the Archbishopric of Lyon, recognising the city's importance over the region both religiously and economically. In the 12th century, the city became a popular stopover and temporary residence for the papacy. The coronation of both Clement V and his successor John XXII took place in Lyon. That century also saw the construction of the city's current cathedral, the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist of Lyon. Construction began in 1180 on the ruins of the 6th century church and was completed in 1476. Despite taking so long to complete, the building managed to maintain a relatively consistent architectural style. The church was heavily damaged by the Wars of Religion in 1562 and later by the French Revolution, in particular in 1793 during the Siege of Lyon. Restoration works on the cathedral started during the 19th century and were still ongoing at the outbreak of the Second World War. Withdrawing German troops committed acts of sabotage in the city, which, whilst not aimed at the cathedral directly, caused significant damage, including most of its stained glass being broken. Restoration works continued throughout the rest of the 20th century and into the start of the 21st century, including on the astronomical clock, which was finally restored in 2021. Since 1998, the cathedral has been part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Old Lyon. In the middle of the 15th century, 4 annual fairs were established in the city, which drew merchants from across Europe, but in particular from Florence. Through this, Lyon became a major centre for the spice and silk trades, the latter being helped by the authorisation by Francois I of weaving privileges in the city, breaking the previous Italian monopoly on silk. Florentine immigrants helped turn the city into an important financial centre for banking and insurance. In 1601, a meeting was held in Lyon that transferred large parts of the Dukedom of Savoy into the French kingdom, including the city itself. Whilst Lyon lost a lot of autonomy in the move, its industrial and commercial importance made it a key city in the expanded kingdom. The 18th century saw the city expanding as its increased prosperity saw the development of systematic town planning and the building of a number of key buildings across the city. This all came to an abrupt end with the French Revolution. After the initial period of constitutional monarchy, the city chose to support the Girondists, who were opposed to the National Convention that took over the running of the French First Republic with its founding in September 1792. The view of the convention was that Lyon was a little too royalist for its liking, and consequently the city was besieged for 2 months. Whilst the city had stagnated during the Revolution period, it began to grow again under the Napoleonic Empire, with Lyon industrialising and continuing its urban development. By the end of the 19th century, the city had 310 silk factories, employing 210,000 workers, helped by the invention in the city, at the beginning of the century, of a Jacquard loom by Joseph-Marie Jacquard, which used punch cards to create complex designs, effectively a proto-computer. The loom would go on to inspire Charles Babbage to develop the analytical engine, generally regarded to be the first concept of a programmable computer, a good century before the first actual computers were built. This was also the time of a rapid expansion of the city, requiring it to grow back up the hills that it had first been conceived around, with funicular railways being constructed to speed citizens to the top of both Croix-Rousse from 1862 and Fourvière from 1878. With the completion of the Basilique Notre-Dame de Fourvière in 1884, work began on further funicular railways, with lines linking up the area around the Basilica opening in 1900. At one time, 5 different funiculars operated across the city, 2 up Croix-Rousse and 3 up Fourvière. Today, just 2 of the Fourvière funiculars survive, although one of the Croix-Rousse funiculars has been converted into a part of Line C of the Lyon Metro. The Saint-Jean to Fourvière funicular, or less poetically the F2, was refurbished in 2018, increasing capacity to 70 passengers per car, which is still a squeeze given they are included as part of the integrated transport ticket for the city, making them popular with tourists and locals in both directions. The Basilique Notre-Dame de Fourvière occupies the site that was once the Roman Forum of Lugdunum. It was built between 1872 and 1896, using private funds in a dominant position overlooking the city and high above the cathedral. This position can make the Basilica look like it's the more important of the 2 religious institutions, even though the Cathedral of Saint-Jean-Baptiste of Lyon is significantly more important. The Basilica is dedicated to the Virgin Mary, who is attributed to the salvation of Lyon from the bubonic plague that swept Europe in 1643. Working overtime, she's also credited with saving the city from a cholera epidemic in 1832 and from Prussian invasion in 1870. Whilst the Basilica is a 19th century construction, it sits alongside the much older shrine of Notre-Dame de Fourvière, which has been in this location as a centre for pilgrimage since 1170. The chapel of the shrine has been rebuilt on numerous occasions, most recently in 1852, when the original steeple was replaced by a tower topped by a golden statue of the Virgin Mary. With the protection of the city from Prussian invasion, the community committed to build a new basilica alongside the ancient chapel. Works commenced on the site in 1872 with the first stone being laid on the 8th of November, though given the location and poor ground conditions for the site, the stone is at the bottom of the foundations that are 22 metres deep. Construction began with the building of the sanctuary, the choir and apse, in part to make the building available for worship as quickly as possible, but also as the choir was the only part of the church not built on the plateau, requiring building up from lower parts of the hill. Works on the church were completed in 1884, though it wasn't until June 16, 1896, that the building was consecrated as a church. Less than a year later, on the 16th of March 1897, Pope Leo XIII elevated the church to that of a minor basilica. Whilst the church had been fully completed and furnished, some of the outside embellishments had not been completed, with, in many locations, rough blocks of stone built into the exterior awaiting sculpturing into their final forms. The poor quality of the soil and ground on this part of the hill have caused ongoing problems to the church, such that by 1913, just 17 years after consecration, there were observations that the building's masonry was shifting, which was confirmed by engineering studies carried out in 1919. However, nothing was done at the time, and it wasn't until Terreaux started to fall from the vault mosaics in 2006 that emergency repairs were launched. Initial repair works were carried out between 2006 and 2013, but further problems were identified at the towers in 2023, requiring the launching of a new restoration project. With the shape of the hill dictating the building's design and construction, it creates the basilica's main feature that's comprised two superimposed churches, though the lower one, accessed via a grand staircase, is often incorrectly called a crypt. As the lower chapel is lit by stained glass windows, it doesn't fit the criteria for being a crypt. Along with the grand internal staircase, the lower chapel is also accessed via a set of stairs from the main forecourt, descending down into the chapel below the main stairs that lead up to the upper church. The area next to the basilica has been turned into a terrace that offers one of the best views out over the modern city of Lyon, from the confluence of rivers where the Romans first saw the potential of the location, to the modern tower blocks rising up in the Pardieu business district located around the central station. Lyon remained in the unoccupied zone of France at the start of World War II, but close to the demarcation line, and consequently the city welcomed large numbers of refugees, as well as becoming an important centre for the resistance. That all changed in November 1942 after the invasion of Vichy France by the Nazis, and Lyon's role earlier in the war led to particularly severe repression. The head of the local Gestapo, Klaus Barbie, went on to become notorious as the Butcher of Lyon for his personal torture and murder of resistance fighters and Jews. It is estimated that he's directly responsible for the deportation of around 14,000 Jews and resistance fighters, personally participating in the roundups. After a long manhunt and final extradition from Bolivia, Barbie went on trial in 1987, where he was tried on 41 separate counts of crimes against humanity. On the 4th of July 1987, he was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment in Lyon, where he died in prison 4 years later, at the age of 77. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, the city has continued to develop, becoming the first city to be linked to Paris by the TGV in September 1981, issuing in the era of high-speed rail services across Europe, whilst the city also built a new metro system and rebuilt from scratch a new tramway system. Today, with a population of over 520,000, Lyon is the third largest city in France behind Paris and Marseille, whilst the larger Lyon metropolitan area takes the population to 2.3 million and easily into the second largest spot in the country. Gare de Lyon-Pardieu sits on the original TGV line from Paris and on historic Paris to Marseille lines, making it one of the most important stations in France. High-speed services from multiple companies link it to Spain, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, Luxembourg and Belgium, whilst high-speed and regular services link the city to the rest of the country. Lyon Saint-Exupéry Airport sits some 20 kilometres southeast of the city centre, linked by the pretty expensive Rhône Express tram. It's a hub for Air France and a base for both EasyJet and Transavia, as well as receiving services from most European flag carriers, and has direct links to North America, the Middle East and North Africa.